I recall my father coming in and waking me up and saying that Australia was at war. War had been declared against Germany. My life at that stage, I was just 16, so I think war was a distant thought at that stage in the life of a 16-year-old. And yes, okay, something that's happened. We knew something of the background to it, but I'd have to say that at that age I didn't feel that we had an involvement. It wasn't until later that that sense of involvement developed. Well, through to the stage where I decided that I would enlist. My mother particularly was so opposed to it. I think having spent all those years in Scotland during the First World War, she rather thought that war in the finish was futile and cost the country the cream of its youth, which undoubtedly it did. My father was less so antagonistic towards it, even though the privations that he'd experienced during the war, and there were many of them, although he never talked much about them. And it wasn't until I'd turned 18 and became aware of what was taking place, the loss of the hood, the epic role of the Royal Air Force in the Battle of Britain. Those things seemed to capture the public's imagination, mine with it, and I then started at that stage to have a greater interest in what was taking place in the war. I finished up in the Navy by default. I'd always been keen to join the Air Force. So when I turned 18, my offsider and I went down to the recruiting office in Creek Street. In those days, that was the Air Force recruiting office. He was accepted, but I was declined. They rejected me. When I was a young fellow, I had an operation on my right foot that left it fairly badly scarred, and I lost some bone. And they said to me, no, we couldn't take you into the Air Force with that sort of wound. Well, I was a bit upset about that. The offsider that I went to enlist with, he finished up as navigator and had a great record of service in the Pacific area. Anyway, reflecting on my rejection, I'd heard that the Navy was less strict. So off I went to the recruiting office in Alice Street, and medicals and what have you. They decided that yes, I would be accepted by the Navy in their communication branch. And so by the earlier part of December of 1939, I had enlisted in the Navy, against my mother's wishes, I may say. She didn't like the sea. And so I spent the next 4.5 years, approximately, in the Navy. Before actually going into the Navy, and after I had enlisted in the Navy, I got a call up from the Citizens Municipal Forces. And I went down to their recruiting establishment and explained the position. I was waiting for a call up from the Navy. They said that that doesn't matter. You've got your call up and you're headed for the Army. So I was in the army for approximately 31 days, I think it was, and in that 31-day period, my call-up actually came from the Navy. My mother, in her reasoning, thought what a wonderful opportunity this is. I'll be able to go down to the Navy office and say to them, my son Jimmy has got a call up from the Army, so you won't want him any longer in the Navy. The Navy said, just let me have that notice, would you? Now, we'll look after that from here. And I think within 48 hours, I was out of the Army and headed for the Navy, with no regrets, I might say. We were what we would call lay signalmen, with the emphasis on cipher coding. We'd all messages in code to the ship in code. We had to decode, and well, to and from the ship. Any message that was coded was put into straight English for distribution amongst those who had to get the and we had cipher books that set out the cipher and the method of converting the written English into a cipher code. So that was part of our work, and another part of our work was helping with signalmen doing their particular job, keeping flags in order and keeping their records up to date. And about halfway through our service on Ipswich, we were trained in trying to track the movement of submarines from information that we were given by the ASDEC people. They would report the movements and direction and the course of the ship, and this was an early experiment, and we were taught on reports that we would get from ASDEC, those items that I mentioned, a possible track that the submarines being detected by the ASDEC, we could give an approximate course and an approximate speed. We had some instances where we had to use that, and I don't know that I could say they were really accurate. It was only a program that was in its infancy, and I think it had to be streamlined to be better effective. There were other duties that we had to perform within the framework of that signal branch of the Navy, but in the main, those are the things we did. We had very close relationship with the wireless people, the radio telegraphists on the ship, and we had 4 of them, and also a very good relationship with the signal crew, and we had 4 of those. So there's the 4 radio telegraphists, the 4 signalmen, and the 2 coders. We were in our own mess deck towards the front of the ship and almost on the waterline. We did have more people come into our mess deck. I know I'm digressing here a little bit. And people who controlled our radar. We got another 4 people to control that. And we also had specialists in the ASDEC, submarine detection, and they came in to our mess deck as well. So it was one crowded space we had, which was probably designed for about 10, but must have accommodated about 13 or 14. So, and that was small for 10. The biggest involvement we had was the landing at Sicily. Our spot was to land at the southwest point of Sicily, and having done what our job was there, we were to go back and bring more ships, which we did. It was often quipped that our skipper was in command of this particular flotilla, and we had to sweep a channel from 5 miles out to sea to the beachhead for ships and the like to get in as close as they could to the shore. So it was said that we were actually leading the the landing at Sicily. In this whole period there, we were bombed with lots of German aircraft, and in sweeping to the shore this channel, the British big ships were out at sea, another 3 or 4 miles to sea, and they were firing their big guns, and you could hear the shells going across us. It was like a train going past. And that, with the bombing and other things that become involved in that sort of warfare, became quite straining. Off the southwest corner of Spain, with Gibraltar almost in sight, our convoy was attacked by somewhere about 50 planes. There were 40 torpedo planes and about 10 dive bombers. Well, we got through that very well. I know the Commander-in-Chief of the Mediterranean Fleet was pretty pleased, according to the message that he sent to us after the operation. And we only lost, or didn't lose, we had 2 ships damaged. I think the escorts of the convoy and the convoy itself actually shot down probably 10 of those planes. And I think there may have been others that probably would not have reached base. One of my action stations was to man a machine gun. There were 2 such machine guns on the ship. They had been captured from the Italians in North Africa, and the skipper got a hold of them and had 2 additional small arms machine guns mounted one either side of the ship. Now, I was assigned to one of those, and my duty was to operate that, if needs be, during action. Well, during this air raid, I promptly assembled with my offsider at this gun, but I didn't have to fire a shot. They were so busy sending up the ammunition for our main gun, 18-pounder, and our full-size Oerlikon anti-aircraft guns that they didn't worry about us, so I wasn't called to press the button to discharge the guns. So whether I'd have been any good or not, I don't know, but that was certainly an eye-opener, because the convoy made smoke. That was the signal, make smoke. If you're going to be attacked like that, they do certain things in the engine room that cause smoke to billow from the engine. And by the time the planes left, the ones remaining left to go back where they'd come from, you could hardly see the convoy, and that is still vivid in my mind, this great layer of smoke that lay over the convoy after the action had taken place. And it wasn't until we got another couple of miles ahead that we could see that our convoy, by and large, was intact. That was probably, I know I perhaps shouldn't use this word, but that was a thrilling episode. I felt that we had really done something to aid the effort, war effort, and certainly not false pride, but a bit proud that you're able to be part of that sort of action. Some of the most tense area of our operation, we were assigned to the Levant end of the Mediterranean. That's down Israel, Beirut and Syria, down that end. And the Germans were trying to retake some of the islands in the Dodecanese. The Germans had occupied them some time before. They'd lost them, and now they were endeavouring to try and take them back. And we were taking convoys from Famagusta in Cyprus and from Tripoli in Syria into the Dodecanese. And that was scary because we knew there'd been very high naval losses in that theatre of war, and we were pretty exposed going into that territory. Everything was okay, as it turned out. We went to an island called Castellorosso, and we left an ammunition ship there, but we would try and get away in the early hours of the morning so we could get some distance between us and the island. But it was later bombed and blown to bits. So they were still quite active in that area. Our ship was registered to being able to do 15 knots, which was a reasonable speed, but certainly not fast. And at 15 knots, you knew the ship was doing 15 knots. There'd be vibration right through the ship. They gave us an assignment to escort a troop ship from Aden to Bombay, straight across. They wanted to travel at 18 knots, and we could only travel at 15 because it was loaded with troops. So we came to the arrangement that we wouldn't zigzag in front of this particular ship, and the troop ship would do the zigzagging behind us, but we would just go straight. And by that he was able to do his 18 knots and we could do our 15. We lost one ship just near the top of Ceylon, Sri Lanka as it is today, and it was the SS Peshawar, I think P-E-S-H-A-W-A-R, and it was a ship from Australia and it was carrying Australian butter, because all floating on the water were these boxes of Australian butter. And another trip up there, outside a place called Visakhapatnam, that's not what they call it today, it's got the old traditional Indian name today. One of our convoy was torpedoed. Now, out of that event, we and two other escorts actually sunk the U-boat. Well, no, it wasn't a U-boat, it was a Japanese submarine, R101. And we were credited, the Navy had a peculiar way of doing things. It would allot percentages where there was some sinking involved. As a ship, we were allotted 55%. The HMAS Launceston was allotted 35%, and the Indian sloop that was with us was allotted the balance. And probably that, I still reflect on that episode, how delighted we were that we'd done this, but how sorry to think that there were all those human beings in a ship under the water who are going to die, that sort of death. You've got to be a bit human in war. These fellows are only doing their duty for their country, and probably if they had their way they wouldn't have been there. But, that's the way it goes. Every time we went back up that way, we would run across the site with our depth sounder, and we could actually see on the graph produced from the soundings the shape of the submarine sitting on the bottom. So that was confirmation. But I think for me personally, the Navy and the war, for all it did and brought to the nation and to individuals, was a service, I think, that I can say I treasured in the finish, because in those days, and I think we mentioned this before, a lad of that age was still a young person, and I felt that I went, not that I was in short pants, but the saying went for young people, that you go into the Navy in short pants, but you come out with long pants. The experience gained in the Navy, in the courses down at Flinders, the introductory courses, and the service on the water, and the service on land in Darwin towards the end of the war, were great teaching areas if you're prepared to keep your eyes open and your ears open. And I think that I'm a better person today as a result of the experience that I had in the Navy. That's why I say that I think I got into the Navy by default rather than by actually wanting to, but with no regrets whatever.